What's up, Zach here, and today I've got the all-new Way of Wade 808 V4 Ultra. I gotta say, there is so much packed into this shoe, so many like really fun things to look at and test out. And although, you know, spoiler alert, these are absolute beasts of a shoe, there are a few things you should know about them prior to putting them on to help give you a little bit more success with them out on court. Let's get into them. And thanks to Way of Wade for sending me a pair of these over to check out. However, as always, this video is not sponsored, and all opinions, good, bad, and indifferent, are all my own. Now, I'd say the biggest warning I have about the 808 4 Ultra comes in its uppers. Now, the uppers of these things, like I said, there is just so much going on. I'll start from the outside, let's work our way in. Number one, it does have a dorsal retention strap. The interesting thing, though, about the dorsal retention strap, though, is it is elastic. So although it does help lock down and tighten down the shoe, it is not going to be as rigid as a retention strap that doubles up over itself, goes under the shoe, those kind of things. Much more meant for, you know, more lockdown, more heel slippage prevention, which we'll get to in a second. Then once you go straight underneath of that dorsal retention strap, the tongue on these things, it's almost like some of the old Nike Vapor Cage shoes, like Vapor Cage 4. This is a pretty odd two-piece tongue, right? A lot of times you'll get a slipper tongue or a booty liner, which is a one-piece tongue, or a traditional three-piece tongue. These are a two, which means they are attached at the lateral side, but then they are detached on the medial side. Interesting thing is, on the medial side, the gusset is really aggressive. It's a lower gusset, but it is stitched all the way across the strobo board. So unlike some shoes that have this two-piece construction, this one is a lot more robust, locks down a lot better, has much more of a feeling of a glove around the dorsal foot as well as around the medial foot, which sometimes with these two-piece tongues, it's the medial side that can feel a little bit floppy, whereas in these ones, it really doesn't once you break them in. The interesting thing, though, is on top of that tongue is the lace line of these things. It's really crazy. These laces grab such a large surface area because it goes in and out of these integrated holes, these reinforced stitched holes on the lateral side. Interesting thing is on the medial side, you just get a standard eyelet, and then on the lateral side, you can do a runner's knot or a Canadian lace, and that is just to give, like I said, more containment laterally. Now, the uppers themselves, all the way from the midfoot wrapping around the forefoot, there's really chunky TPU and textile weaving. There's two layers of this. You get a padded mesh layer underneath, then on the top of it is you know, mostly that TPU and textile weave. Now, the tongue I should say the tongue has dense padding, but it is thin. One thing I noticed is the laces are so thin because it has to go through all these holes. Now, the tongue does have macro holes for, you know, for airflow and you know, moisture egress. If you look at this thing on the breathability test, pretty interesting. These only heated up 112.9 degrees. Now, remember, these are a drop-in midsole shoe, right? So you've got thermoplastics right underneath of your foot, kind of like the Way of Wade Shadow 5, which has a removable insole of thermoplastics. Now, the Way of Wade Shadow 5 with this one heats up a lot more. I think that's because this boom insert here, you know, it kind of rides up over your foot more, so I think it's just able to trap heat more, whereas in this one, the drop-in, like I said, lays a little bit more flat, so that hot air isn't getting trapped in as many places as maybe something, you know, where your foot is compressing in on the shoe, right, and then all that hot air from the bottom of your foot is actually getting, you know trapped into that removable insole, whereas this one, like I said, you're not riding as low into there. So I think that's why these do a little bit better. Like I said, these didn't feel hot at all, even on really hot days when I had these on outside. It really didn't feel bad versus some other shoes that have, you know, thermoplastic underneath of them that did. If you look at the breathability mapping on them, you saw the same thing. Fog gets out of the tongue very easily, but then after a few seconds, it does get out of the forefoot of the shoe. It just took a few seconds longer, and then that's when the heat and obviously the fog, you know, really started to come out of these shoes. So honestly, for a shoe with, you know, direct foot on thermoplastics, these breathe exceptionally well. They handle moisture exceptionally well, especially for how much is going on in these uppers. And speaking of, on the upper durability test, 10-second tie grit sandpaper, the burr works through the drag guard, but it does not get into the weaving underneath of it. I'd say if you're on a really gritty outdoor court, this might start to look pretty weird, but I'd still say that the durability is okay, because you definitely have this, you know, a little bit of a chunkier piece of plastic right over that. I think that's where you're going to get the most wear. So there is enough on these to drag and slide outside. We'll talk about their profile in the outsole section and performance section on outdoor courts, but at least in the uppers, even though they might look a little weird, they should do just fine. But speaking of, you know, kind of the construction of these uppers are ridiculously substantial, and that goes double for the padding in the ankle collar, which is double padded. And so when you first lace them down, they are going to have a lot of heel slippage. There's just no getting around it. You need to break them in. So I'd say the biggest warning I have in these, to get back to what I originally said, is wear them around the house for a few hours before you take them out. Break in the uppers. The lockdown when you first put them on, just like I said, isn't great. Subsequently, afterwards, it's fantastic. It'll lock you down really well once they break in. Also, when we get into the fit section, there's some fit and, comfort issues that come along with break-in as well, which we'll get to. But in terms of heel slippage, once they break in, it's mild to none. In the very beginning, it's moderate. So when you first get them, wear them, get them broken in. That way, when you first take them out on court, you're sunken into them and your foot's not moving. And getting into the midsole teardown, honestly, in terms of the drop-in, nothing really too crazy. It's a full bed of boom foam. What is the crazy part about the midsole teardown is it's over 3 centimeters of stack height in the rear foot. This is an enormous drop-in. When I had my foot in here, I said, man, this is one of the more, I'd say, supportive drop-ins that I've seen. And I'm like, there's really not much on there. There's no plastic. There's no carbon fiber on it. It's just the volume of foam in there, right? There's just so much on foot. Now, when you take that off, the strobo board is foam underneath of that, so another layer of, a little more plush padding. Underneath of that almost looks like a rubberized plastic or almost like a Pebex sheet underneath of that, which houses the carbon fiber shank. And that carbon fiber shank does have a little leaflet that goes into the rear foot and then into the midfoot. In terms of where it crosses over your arch, it's not super long, but it does cross from the rear foot into the midfoot. Look at it on the bound height test. Got 40 centimeters in the rear foot, 45 in the forefoot. That's what we're used to seeing with these shoes. The one thing I noticed is that, like I said, when you break the shoe in and you actually get a good lockdown and everything's working as a unit, that's when these things feel bouncy. That's when these things feel super fast. We'll get to the speed when we get to the outsole tread, but I would say once again, it's the break-in on these that is the most important part. Because at first, when you're getting a little bit of heel slippage, and it's also because there's a higher stack of foam in there, right? Then once you actually break in the shoe, that's when you really start to see kind of the more violent speed and jumping capabilities of these shoes. But getting into the outsole tread, this is a very interesting pattern. Number one, it's more of a grid in the rear foot, and then it breaks up into mainly real like linear tread, just a little bit offset linear tread on the lateral side, and then it goes into a delta pattern on the medial side, and then it kind of does, the opposite in the forefoot, right? Those linear patterns kind of go the opposite direction. Now, what I noticed is, number one, I'd say that the coolest part about this is not necessarily the pattern of rubber, but the fact that it has 2 flanges. It's got a lateral flange made of, number one, TPU, and then, the outsole tread, which is really wide, really broad and strong lateral flange made of 2 different materials. But also, there's a lateral flange on the heel. You can tell it is there. This thing is fantastic for lateral stability in the heel. When you spray it, a lot of times when you're coming down on your heel, right, and you have no support, and that's when your ankle twists. And having this out there, having just a little bit of a flange there, really does help, and you really can notice, even though you're sitting up over 3 centimeters in the rear foot. This is a very nice addition. One thing I'll say is, on the grip test ramp, it did slip at 39 degrees, which isn't super tack, and I noticed on hardwood, it's just more of a middle-of-the-road, kind of forgiving type shoe. It does not feel slippery whatsoever. Like I said, it doesn't feel super tack either. I think that's basically a product of how the tread lines work, right? I think it's more meant to kind of move with you, more of a flowing tread. Look at it on the viewing box. You can kind of see those treads are all kind of, compressing in unison. I noticed on outdoor courts, if the court wasn't dirty or it wasn't on more slick paint, I mean, it was, the traction was just fine. It's just when I would hit more of a slick spot, that's when these things would start to slide a bit on outdoor courts. On indoor courts, like I said, I didn't really have any problems with slippage. And the dust pickup on these, yeah, they'll pick up a little bit of dust, but they're very easy just to wipe down. That was the one nice thing about that, is just quick wipe was fine. I would say profile of these really is more meant for indoor courts though, I think, and that's where they really do their best work. I mean, speaking of, you look at the speed ratio, comes in at a 2.89, shank score of 0.2, brings that up to a 3.09, and even though that shank score, that shank doesn't have much material that goes into the rear foot to cross that zone, the shoes are fast enough to justify being over a 3 on that shank score. I noticed that, number one, they get off the blocks incredibly quick, but number two, once you start moving in them, just the energy return of them, just how they feel bounding down the court and the protection they give all your joints while you're, kind of getting up to speed and really putting in hard strikes. I think that's the best attribute of them. And I also noticed that when I was coming to a stop from getting up, into higher speeds for me, not necessarily for anybody else, I get it. I'm not the fastest dude out there anymore. But when I was getting up to, at least my high speeds, even when I would hit more of a dirty spot or a slick spot on an outdoor court, that flange was still keeping me pretty stable on the shoe. I was actually able to re-grab traction and kind of get back to good and then get back to more of a squared position, to hit a shot. So like I said, it really is the flanges on these that are doing the bulk of the work, I think, in terms of the sure-footedness, the stability, the grip and traction. Now, if you look at that tread on the outsole durability test, speaking of 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper, number one, the durometer on these comes in at a 19.5. I mean, this is harder rubber, and the burr basically just scuffs it up. I mean, it really does not do much. The one thing is, in the rear foot, the tread is so close together. To me, these are just more indoor shoes. Like I said, you can use them on outdoor courts. I think if you don't, slide and drag a ton, they're okay for outdoor courts. And the protection against the asphalt and concrete is great. It's just that if you want to use this tread to its maximum potential, get it nice and warmed up on an indoor hardwood or rubberized court, and that's where you're going to get the best combination of stability from the flanges as well as grip from the tread. But talking about the fit of the 808 Ultra, if you want to get the most out of these, you want these to be comfortable for you, take my advice, wear them around the house for a few hours the day before you are going to take them out on court. If you break them in on court, it's going to be a little bit more of an extended break-in. I noticed with me, the first day I had these on, they were pretty cramped. I did have some hot spots here and there on both feet. They were pretty uncomfortable. And then the next day, they were fine. They felt fantastic. Now, this shoe does have a 12-degree inflare, which is, a little bit higher of an inflare. It's not terrible. They come in at a pretty standard 28.8 centimeter length, a 9 centimeter metatarsal width, 10 centimeter toe box width, and a 31-degree toe box taper. And honestly, in terms of width and length, it's a pretty just standard, straight down the middle shoe. It's just that, like I said, the uppers of these things just need broken in. That drop in just needs a little bit of time to conform to your foot. I gotta say, from day one to day two in these, I mean, it felt like I had a different shoe on. It was so nice, just really had a great lockdown, right? I didn't have the heel slippage, but I also didn't have any cramping, any pain, anything in these things. Now, in terms of the snake bitten foot, kind of same thing. There's just such a volume of foam in there that, like a lot of 808 shoes, these are probably the best drop-in shoe out there for a lot of snake bites in terms of heel pain, arch pain, ball of foot pain, right? Especially, ankle sprainers with the lateral flange on the forefoot, lateral flange in the rear foot. In terms of a drop-in midsole shoe, once again, this is one of the best out there. The 808 threes are really good because I feel like the forefoot in them, a little bit more flat to the ground. You can just get a little bit more feel on there. It's just a better profile. Whereas in these ones, it's kind of the flanges that's doing a lot of the work for you. In terms of shin splints, knee, hip, back pain, especially like me with getting over my jumper's knee, these things felt absolutely fantastic. Even on an outdoor court, you can see I did not have any tape on these things. Any of the days I played in them, the day I filmed them, I didn't have it on either. So in terms of snake bites, really any lumps, bumps, bruises, in terms of a drop-in, once again, these are some of the best out there. And in terms of the performance of the 808 Ultra, really similar to the 808 3 Ultra V2. I like these a lot more than the 808 3 Ultra. These much more remind me of the 808 3 than the 808 3 Ultra V2. In terms of number one, their speed off the blocks, the pop off the ground in these things, the feeling of bounce underneath of you. Just really, like I said, the 808 line of Way of Wade, it makes even me more of a believer in drop-in midsole shoes, even though a lot of them I'm not a huge fan of. There are exceptions to that, but these ones are definitely some of those exceptions. I'd say in terms of a shoe, if you want more of a a speedy, quick shoe side to side, a little bit more of a nimble shoe that also gets up off the ground very easily, right? Also for rebounds, repeat jump shots, getting up over somebody, right? Ease of bounce. This is definitely something to take a look at. And a lot of times, you're not getting that in a drop-in shoe, right? Because drop-in shoes just don't feel super bouncy because the shoe isn't all integrated together, so it's not moving as one unit. Whereas in these ones, the lockdown is so elite on them once they're broken in that it really does feel like some more of those real jump-focused, more stiff setup shoes. So honestly, I'm not sure which one I liked more, the 808 3 Ultra V2 or the V4 Ultra. They're just different, but they accomplish kind of the same goal in different ways. I'm really excited to see if Way of Wade comes out with an 808 4 Ultra V2 with a little bit more of that elastic high top. It gives you a little bit more of that sensation around the distal leg. I really like that. Not so much for containment, right, or ankle sprain. It's not doing anything for that. But I kind of like that feeling of being a little bit more enveloped around there, like the 808 3 Ultra V2. So hopefully they do make that in the future. But in terms of the low top version, like I said, it's such a fun shoe to go coast to coast on, as well as just doing repeat and repeat layups. And just kind of what we've come to expect, from the 808 line. And speaking of, lines of Way of Wade that people super interested in, if you do want to see the flagship Way of Wade 11 go onto the knife, make sure you click into this video up above and subscribe down below. Respect your rubber and foam. I'll see you somewhere in the Sneakerverse.